Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jake Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of Iminds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Yeah.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Where's the other co-host?
Well, he's been having a wild morning, and Renita's got him off somewhere else, being active, doing something somewhere else. So I just got in from out in the yard. He's been having quite a run this morning.
He likes the half pipes out there. I saw some Facebook
Well, Point Pinole has 2,700 acres of open space, and most of it is off-leash trail. There's some asphalt kind of trail stuff that dogs have to be on leash, because some people like have wheelchairs or fishermen hauling stuff back and forth for the pier are on that road. But the rest of it's all off leash, and there's a section, as you saw, that has the trail kind of cut through the hill. And it behaves like a half pipe. So he runs from the top on one side down, swooping through to the top on the other side, back and forth, and I don't know. He jumps from the sides on all the way to the bottom, kind of bounding around. He's a crash dummy dog when he's running. He's still a pup, and as fast as he's growing, his front end is pretty good, but his hind end can't quite figure out where he's going sometimes, so he'll sideswipe stuff.
Have you scanned his brain yet, Jay?
No.
Just in case.
I'll let him be the dog he's growing up to be. He's actually doing really quite well. We're pleased with all the puppy play groups and everything, having gotten him socialized. So.
He's getting good report cards. Good.
So far. So he does have a little imp in him still. But that's good.
So mental health in the news. So many things to talk about. Pick one. Let's go on a tangent. Anything strike your fancy, guys, gals?
I don't know. I mean, we've already talked about the resilience issue in mental health.
Right.
That's a big one. But I think the other is in terms of like what type of treatment are professionals offering. As we're here on screen ourselves, I think it's great in terms of being able to communicate some basic things. But I think when you really, really are in crisis, you need face-to-face, heart-to-heart. And I have a bit of an issue with the propagation of only online counseling. I really question the length of treatment, the efficacy of the treatment. But I'm in the minority. A lot of studies have come out and say it's A-okay. But I'm a bit concerned, not just, we are obviously going to throw in neurotherapy, but the length of the treatment that I'm seeing on online or on screen therapy tends to be longer than that face-to-face. Shall we loop in the neurotherapy, Jay? That's the cure. Come on in and get some electrodes on your brain. We have you in and out a lot faster.
So they're having online accessible therapists is probably a good thing for a lot of people. But if there's some people that are in severe crisis that have to have some face-to-face or inpatient work as well. And that has to be available. Unfortunately, our health denial system ends up making that very difficult. Even though it's listed as a service that's provided, is unfortunately difficult to get proper medical care. And the desperate families contacting, trying to get help for an adult autistic who's acting out, end up having the police respond, and what are they going to do? Their training is not for getting Big Johnny to behave. They're it doesn't go well. And luckily, we still do see office folks seeing people, even though we've struggled through the pandemic and shutdowns and whatnot. The offices are still open. Here's the co-host.
Oh, okay. There we go.
He decided he's turning the other way. There's still something going on in the kitchen. So,
but all the talk therapists are full. They're busy. They can't handle any more people.
Yeah, but I think, one of the things we need to put on the table as well. One is the talk therapist. And I don't, I think based on region, there are different levels of schooling, of education, but I kind of want to talk about scope of practice. One of the issues I think also with individuals, and I don't want to sound too elitist or snobby here, but with broader knowledge bases. So when we talk about, registered psychologists, they're doing a lot of assessment as opposed to direct intervention. And again, that assessment very frequently leads to a pharmacal non-solution. And then you have a wide breadth of what we call the counselors, who are dealing with more and more extreme cases. That talk therapy, it helps, but it's a really, really slow process. So I think we need a bit of a call for individuals who have really good experience with, being in the trenches with not just garden variety anxiety and depression, but the real deal, to get out there and providing other things than just assessment. Probably going to get in trouble for saying that, but sometimes it needs to be said. And I think that's where we kind of loop into going to the mechanism itself, the brain, and blending that with the environment. Why did all of this happen after the pandemic? What is the reason? What are the cultural negative supports? Why are we always going back to this negative homeostasis of depression and anxiety?
And I have to say that in longitudinally, having seen data streams of eyes closed data across the years, it's hard now to see young teens actually make it through a 10-minute study with their eyes closed and stay awake. The degradation of the quality of sleep from 1999 to now average 2 hours less per night. Now, that has a negative influence on your brain function during the day, and there's no way around it. When we see the EEGs looking like ADD, but it's basically drowsiness. Eyes closed, anteriorized alpha, anteriorized theta comprise the deep A and B stages of vigilance, if you understand vigilance modeling, a European approach to analyzing EEG vigilance. And if over a 20-year period we've lost 2 hours of sleep, we're essentially chronically sleep deprived, as all these young kids are sleep deprived. You know how well the brain works when it's sleep deprived? Yeah, man. Omission errors, commission errors, odd reaction time. You're going to start to test and look like you have ADD when all you have is really horrid sleep hygiene. And the mental state is not well regulated. All sorts of bad actions can happen. So, if I were a parent, I would be paying close attention to little Jane and little Johnny's Aura Ring or Fitbit or something that's monitoring their sleep, because if they're not sleeping well, they're going to have mental problems, because anybody's brain, when it's sleep deprived, has mental problems.
Yeah, I think what we're facing is a big, cultural crisis here. To piggyback what Jay was saying, what is the first form of torture? Whether it's military or whatnot, it's sleep deprivation. What do you do when you want to get information and have people give impulsive answers? Is sleep deprivation. So, but there's another component here, and maybe a shameless plug for my book. I go into that in a lot of detail, but there's this horror buy-in of how active children need to be. Families are racing around right, left, and center, going to this practice and that practice and this training and that training, and kids are go 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 go. And then their downtime is another stimulant, which is the interactive, really, really high arousal, whether it's scrolling or gaming or what have you. So I'm really pro rediscovering, the beautiful middle ground, the quiet, not to be confused with mindfulness exercises and mindfulness training. But that true quiet space, that true boredom, from which innovation and curiosity sparks, and also a nap here and there, right? So I think we're talking about a bigger picture crisis. Like, how can we really reach parents to say it's okay to slow down? In fact, your kids aren't going to be behind because you slow down. They're actually going to be ahead for it.
I haven't heard the DSM-5 yet, Jay. If the parents can't pay for it, if it doesn't exist, it's like a tree falling in the woods. If nobody's there, does it make a sound? Well, if it doesn't exist in DSM-5, is it really an issue?
Yeah, well, the DSM-5 is the issue, and we're always hearkened back to it. They basically said they weren't going to fund research that was DSM-5 oriented. They would only do research domain criteria, more peer research without the diagnosis being associated with it, because the DSM doesn't have any predictive validity. It doesn't predict what med you're going to respond to. It doesn't predict anything except your billing category. So the research needed to go away from it, but they're still orienting back to it. They want the QEEG to co-register with the DSM category. Well, you're taking something that's real and trying to co-register it with something that's imaginary, and the imaginary is not the QEEG. That's quite real. So the DSM is still kind of haunting the research literature as a false category you have to compare yourself to, and that's really quite unfortunate. There's progress away from it in identification of biomarkers and neuromarkers, and the thalamocortical dysrhythmia as a failure mode within different brain networks, transdiagnostic as a failure mode that can be treated, and it's identified without a human. It's a machine learning algorithm can identify it even. So the validity of it is really quite potent. When they find the dysrhythmia and they identify the location, they can predict what your symptom is. So it's an important getting away from the DSM, and it points quite directly when you see it as a way to how to fix it. So we are on the cusp of kind of escaping the DSM, but it's like being at quicksand. It's still sucking at our feet, not letting us go, and that's frustrating. And that I quite commonly end up having people say, "Well, I have XYZ as a diagnosis. What protocol should I use?" Oh, well, the DSM predicting neurofeedback protocols now, huh? No predictive validity. none, zero. So don't use a diagnostic category you think you have to try to pick a protocol. You have to go based on biomarkers, neuromarkers, endophenotypes, those sorts of things.
If I could
And
jump in here, Jay, I think there's actually some really indirect good news out here. If you just look at how long it took to get the latest version of the DSM out, how much argumentation. So it's starting to bubble. And I think the really good news is there are enough of us, doing things like NeuroNoodle and chatting. If somebody says, I have a depressed client, everybody says, okay, what does the EEG say? We just kind of go with that as, okay, a title, not a diagnosis. And I think the other one is, looking at the rise of the clinical databases. So I think there are a couple of really interesting things happening. And within specific disciplines, we're moving on ahead, leaving the DSM behind. But I think this kind of loops into what I was saying before, that I think there are a lot of really, really qualified people out there stuck in assessment and diagnosis. And this is my appeal to any university professors out there. Please, open up, spend a few more than a couple of weeks on the biomarkers. That's where we really, really have to get in.
Yeah.
How are we getting out of we say we're on the cusp of getting away from the DSM-5, but I'm under the impression that in order for insurance to pay, it's got to coincide with it, right? So,
you harken back to the interview with we've had previously, or Evian Gordon and Martijn Arns. Martijn's presentation at Sassoon Summit this year pointed to a way to stratify decision making based on neuromarker, biomarker, and it's peer-reviewed published. That particular presentation is in press now. So the basis for the literature to support biomarker-based decision making, in a way that doesn't require everybody coming through the door to have a complete assessment, but it ends up with routine decision-making points that end up having biomarkers that will end up sorting people into different treatment categories. And that approach, I think, is really quite powerful. And Evian and his team are looking for an inexpensive screener device. And if there's anything odd in the screening, then a more full assessment is done. But they're looking at biomarker-based stratified treatment decisions. So you get to a point, is it this or that, and then the EEG finding ends up making the decision. So I also have to say that there's a lot of AI looking at EEG, and at some point that there's likely to be some AI influence over some of this. That said, AI needs a lot more data. And, they start out thinking happily that they'll just toss the data at the AI and it will tell them things. And it apparently needs to be guided a lot more than that, because they don't have a large enough, broad enough database for it to end up kind of as an unregulated search.
Yeah, we have to, I'd say, like every other discipline that really hopped on the AI bandwagon, our discipline has to be not just as cautious, more cautious, because our errors are not going to be as apparent. Whether we, the garbage in, garbage out, bias in, bias out, and here I'm going to launch another big appeal, like clean your bloody data. Know how to read raw data before you put any of this into AI. I talked about AI versus AI. The other guest we had on was talking about, human in the loop. All of that, excuse me, is absolutely imperative. So I'm going to be screaming, not from the sidelines, from the center of the field. Make sure whatever data you're putting in is clean.
Yeah. And the data has to be representative of the general population for it to end up having a general ability to make a statement. And right now, data that's available to EEG people in hospital settings are all epilepsy and encephalopathies. They don't have general psychiatric populations, with the EEG data. So that it's going to take quite a bit of time for the mass of data sufficient for the algorithms to scrub over. A crude estimate would suggest that if they have a broad base and about 500,000 EEGs, they might have something.
You're at 1 million. Can we say 1 million now?
I don't claim anything past the 90s.
We're not even talking about.
I'm so old. There's no memory anymore, anyway. So why consider any new ones at all? So.
Yeah. And we've got culture, and we've got region, we've got heterogeneous groups and homogeneous groups. I mean, all this type of stuff. We have to make sure there's good science behind all of this.
Evidence-based and personalized, and those two principles should be guiding our choices in therapy. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of DSM-based wild guessing. The number of times I've heard of somebody having an out-of-control event and being given an antipsychotic and having them get worse. And we look at the EEG and find that they have temporal lobe epileptiform discharges. If you would have looked at the EEG in the first place, you would have known better than to give an antipsychotic. They need an anticonvulsant to stop their out-of-control behavior. Pseudobulbar affect is quite often due to epileptogenic process, not due to psychosis. And treating somebody based on the DSM, they were crazy, they must need an antipsychotic. They behaved oddly, they need to have their brain checked, and then that'll tell us what to treat.
You're looking back into the big problem again. If you have a police officer that's responding to that, I mean, you're so many degrees away from the actual knowledge base that's going to be able to help the individual in crisis.
Well, the PTSD for the police officer themselves.
They're being put into a circumstance they're not trained for and not appropriate for. And we need to have dispatchable social interface of some sort to assess psychiatric emergencies. And some of those require some force backup, but at the same time, you'd end up having an interface with somebody who's got an idea that, this is an autistic adult in a crisis, and they're not going to understand or respond to command, and de-escalation has to happen. But our society ends up being a massive society with huge pressures, and the percentage of the society that have high ASA scores and end up being reactive because of it. It reminds me back in the era when they were starting to talk about nuclear fission, and they would have a bunch of ping pong balls mounted on mouse traps in a room. They would toss one little ball in, and the whole room would suddenly explode with little mouse traps going on. Well, we've got all these people out there that are keyed up like the mouse traps that are loaded because of their earlier life experiences, and they're all easily triggerable, and you toss one little thing out there, and you get excessive reactions out of character level reactions, and uh, you know there's a boiling point or critical mass calculation for most systems. We don't have such a calculation for our social system, but I think we're sitting pretty close to that point. um, and the ability to break through and have a state change and have things essentially blow up is right on the edge in many communities.
Well, the control rod for to control the
Yeah,
the fission is, the social media and the advertising, and the comparing yourself to somebody else, and all that. As Dr. Marie says, the screen time, the more screen time that you're on, that only accelerates the problem, right, Doctor?
Yeah, I think we're in a crisis of dissatisfaction. Everybody is always comparing themselves to these alter egos, these ideals. Excuse me. And I mean, we're not
Airbrush
even getting into
pictures.
the generalized misinformation, we always kind of knew at some point, when the pretty lady held up a soapbox in 1952, we knew the lady was selling soap, right? And she was being paid to sell soap. But I think a lot of the things with the influencers, we lose connection. It's so, I would say, falsely personalized at this point. I mean, good gosh, Pete, I could go on literally for hours for this, but I think we're
I'll
dealing with
take
a
30.
globalized sorry?
I'll take 30 minutes.
Okay, yeah. No, we're dealing with a globalized disenchantment, I think. When boiling down to lack of community, everybody is exhausted. As I said before, the level of, DSM, non-DSM, but, people feeling disenfranchised, people feeling anxious, people feeling depressed, people feeling unsupported, go, and sleep deprived. And then if we kind of get into the generalized community, as Jay was talking, um, you have individuals that are in crisis because of unknown eleptiform. We have individuals in crisis because they're neuroatypical, and people, families are having trouble managing. We have the drug crisis, and first responders, how do they know where they're going or what they're doing? So we stick them with something to calm them. We're talking about a much bigger issue here. But if you bring that person in and put some electrodes on their head, yeah,
So
we can have a true peek at what's going on.
FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yes.
What's going on with that? Is it that I want that rush of the dopamine, or what's going on? I think there's a lot of that going on out there.
We started talking about this, oh gosh, 15 years ago. This is a created crisis. Okay, this is essentially where you create arousal it's part of the attention economy. If you constantly make somebody feel that they need to be present, need to be following, or they feel physically unsettled and therefore mentally unsettled, you have the absolute ideal consumer. It's intentional. One of the things that I hate, even on the radio now, I know I've mentioned this a couple of programs back, on the radio, it used to be like, after this song, we'll talk about this. No, it's tomorrow, or it's after 3 songs. Same thing in terms of television. These pauses on game shows and the music plays. Everybody is playing with our arousal, trying to keep us right on the edge. And then we wonder why we feel anxious. It's everywhere. Everybody is playing with our arousal cycles. Jay, can you name, or even Pete, can you name one thing apart from perhaps a solitary walk with no devices, where somewhere, someone, some agency is not playing with your arousal cycle?
Well, first of all, what's a radio? Number 2.
Yeah.
No, Number two, it's not listening to 3 songs. It's like binging. It's
Yeah.
there's not waiting till the next episode next week. It's
Yeah.
I'm going to consume it all right now and not sleep and take it all in.
Yeah, it's the more. It's the illness of cornucopia. I call it an illness of gluttony. And what has happened to our psychoneurophysiology, where we feel that we need more, and we're never satisfied. I mean, we're literally being programmed for this. I mean, there's no pun intended in that at all. Very few things, the arousal cycle does not complete. We're satisfied when the brain and the body become aroused together. They crest and they come down together. This should be a satisfaction. Okay. And we're always, I shouldn't lose absolutes, but in many of the things that we do, we come up here and we're left here.
Yeah. Okay. Sturman in his work pointed to that downside, that's post-reinforcement synchronization. Mm-hmm. And after the correct button push, or if it's a cat tapping a bar to get some chicken broth and milk, after a correct response, you see a burst of alpha. And that burst of alpha is the same burst of alpha that you would get if you took a shot of heroin. But unfortunately, heroin only gives it to you the first time, and it gets less and less and less effective. But when you make a proper guess, a proper response, the brain's telling you, you got it. That's the post-reinforcement synchronization. It's a nice big burst of alpha. Very brief burst, but it's the brain's way of saying, I got it. Self-reinforcement, a pat on your own back, and it's missing in a lot of life circumstances, unfortunately. So.
Yeah. And how do you train that down once it's been up? Right. And I think this is why a lot of people are going from that anxiety, depression. Where is that satisfaction in the middle? I mean, a term that used to be extremely novel, I would say 10 years ago, was anxious depression. Okay. I don't see a lot of people who just have that good old standard sadness, melancholy depression. Majority of the people that I'm working with now, it's an anxious depression. I'm sure most of my colleagues in the field of neuro would really agree. And the regions of the brain that are showing this, it's not one site. It's not just the imbalance in the frontal lobes anymore. The occipit is really, really involved in all of this now.
Yeah, and the individuals pointing 1.5 to 3 Tesla magnets at the head for TMS have some specific targets that they assume are there, but they're not always there. And they don't use the EEG as guidance to see whether they are there, unfortunately. They have a standard protocol with a standard location, assuming left frontal alpha. And as the iSpot-D study with over 3,000 patients with depression showed, it isn't all left frontal alpha. So, the basic assumption isn't correct. But if you actually look, you will see. And you'll also identify those that have 1 hertz stimulation on the right needed to get rid of beta spindling. And the TMS practitioner not doing EEG is basically being guided by the DSM. And we know how well the DSM predicts outcomes. If you want to optimize your clinical outcomes, know what you're shooting your magnet at. Actually, look at the EEG before you point it. And there are patented approaches to treat the thalamocortical dysrhythmia using dissociative drugs and TMS at the same time, ketamine, DMT, psilocybin, and so forth. I don't think their patent's any good, but they patented it anyway. And they're not looking at the DSM at all. They're looking at thalamocortical dysrhythmia and pointing the magnet at that and giving a dissociative drug, turning up the intensity on the magnet and blasting away. And TMS is neuromodulatory. There's a lot of ways to modulate the nervous system. You don't necessarily have to use a 1.5 to 3 Tesla magnet. You can do neurofeedback. You can do DC stim, AC stim. Dirk de Ritter implants electrodes. I mean, there's lots of ways to do your neurostim.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, though, they the subtle changes, the self-awareness of change. I think a lot of people just don't feel they're getting better until they literally get a blast. Yeah. Can we have a little fun, Jay? Comments on it's been a trend for a while. It kind of freaks me out. The young ladies putting magnets on their eyes to attach eyelashes. Can you tell us what that may or may not be doing to the brain?
Oh my goodness.
I've been constantly counseling people, don't do this. The eyes are the one exposed parts of the brain, but literally magnets. Please give us the science.
I can't imagine this. No, but when I stop and think about it, the number of things that have been done for the Belladonna,
yeah.
Make your pupils large. You put Belladonna toxicity into your eyes to dilate them. Mercury was a common substance for makeup. Yeah. And if you look at makeup now, half the stuff has got, recalls and toxicity and heavy metals, and there's, it's not regulated in a way that you might consider. Mm-hmm. The magnets on the eyes is not the first stupid makeup thing that I've heard of. But you can see I'm not really terribly concerned with cosmetics.
But I mean, I think we need to put, sorry?
You got to explain to me what is they're like little tiny magnets is going underneath the skin and they're sticking, like how do...
Well, it's essentially you put, the way you used to put glue on the top of the lids to attach false eyelashes. People are now essentially putting magnets on the eyelid and then attaching magnetized eyelashes. It's been around quite a while, but it's really being
pushed now. A magnet puts out a static field, mm-hmm. but a moving magnet mm-hmm. puts out an alternating field.
Yeah.
There's actually a TMS device that has rollers that spin fixed magnets at 0.65 Tesla, and they rotate the magnets to create the repetitive magnetic field. And they've got a series of them that sit down the midline of the brain. Repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, but without electromagnetic pulse, but with pulsed rotating fields. Well, batting your eyelashes 10 times a second, which could be an involuntary eye flutter. Eye flutter that's voluntary is capped at about 6 movements a second. Mm-hmm. But you've got an alternating generator that you're moving, and goodness knows what the effect on the brain of a subtle 6 hertz or fluttery frequency might be.
I have to ask folks, how recently you've had Botox, and now are you wearing these silly things, before we do an EEG? Yeah. Well, yeah.
But Botox. Botox will get rid of the scar, though,
I'm trying to remember from my John Anderson neurofeedback training that I took 3 times, and maybe I retained 5% of it. When your eyeball closes, doesn't that do something that a positive and negative circuit? So
Yeah.
what?
In fact, if you look at the EEG, the eye blink in an EEG has a very sharp positive downward aspect of it, and then a slow rolly negative aspect of it, because the eye blinks and then slowly returns. And that eye blink is essentially a dipole. Now, the literature will tell you the dipole is the difference between the retina and the cornea. And that's published, it's peer reviewed, it's repeated again and again. The dipole is the difference between the aqueous and vitreous humor in the eye. If you perforate the membrane that separates them, you short the dipole. So people that have had cataract surgery have a good eye and a cataract surgery eye. You're going to get an eye blink on one side and really not much of anything on the other. So it's literally, but it's a dipole that you're rotating. So it's doing DC stim. There are some people that would, early on in the EMDR, where you have to look right, left, they were suggesting that there was a DC stimulation of the frontal lobe alternating back and forth with the eye movement. Now, you can simulate that with a DC device, but it's more than just the DC movement of the eye for EMDR, but that you do have a dipole, and it's a very strong dipole. You get 150 to 300 microvolts pretty commonly, sometimes 500 microvolts in kids. Really large, strong dipoles. So it's a fairly strong signal, but I don't know that they're timing it well enough to have a specific therapeutic effect or anything.
Now the last thing, and then we'll close out, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of the problems that we're running into is advertising, right? When it comes down to it, whatever it is, somebody's trying to sell something, somebody's trying to make you act in a certain way in the future, and people will pay money to do that. In The Social Dilemma, they talk about that. If anybody hasn't watched it on Netflix, check it out. It's very, very good, very disturbing. We're getting to the end of this year. Now we're getting to next year, which is an election year. Okay. I'm sure we're going to have the Trump effect. We're going to have, I'm on this side, I'm on that side. And if the talk therapy people are booked now, just wait. What can we anticipate in an election year, guys?
I'm going to jump in as a Canadian.
Yeah.
Please read your history books. See what you're walking into. Go back to your history books. And I really make a great, huge call out to anybody in any capacity of disseminating information, any educator. Bring people back to history, lest it repeat.
Well, I would suggest the late 20s through the 1930s is a good stretch to look at. Yeah. When the United States had its own little earlier encounter with fascism. And that it's quite eye-opening to actually look at the detail of the history. And it's not,
don't forget
Spain. I didn't learn about the 1930s in school, I'll say that.
Yeah. But people walk into this not blindly. They walk into this happily. Franco, Mussolini, everybody references Hitler, that one, but it's all there.
It's interesting you bring up history, because today is December 7th. Pearl Harbor. FDR couldn't get America together on anything, and he needed Pearl Harbor to happen to unite everybody to go deal with the issues over there. And
now you're not trying to start a rumor that this was an inside job, now are you? Pearl Harbor.
Well, the isolationism was there. You had your 9/11. To get everybody together. Now we have this political advertising that's going to come up next year, and it's going to divide everybody
as best they can,
because that's what they're getting paid to do. And it's just, people need to know it's going to happen, and they have to have some type of strategy to deal with it, or it's going to be, oh my goodness, everybody's going to put their heels in the sand. they're not going to budge, and you're going to have people getting love Trump, hate Trump, whatever it is. He triggers a lot of things out there, and people are going to be disturbed up here in a couple of months, because it's really going to get.
I wrote about that too.
What chapter? What chapter?
Pause here. I'll get it.
Okay.
But no, I actually, in the attention economy, I think.
Oh, this is great clickbait, by the way.
23.
I have a solution if you start to get
Chapter
over-aroused.
Yeah.
If you start to get over-aroused and agitated with political ads and things like that, what you want is a warm, heated blanket
yes.
on your lap.
That can do Zoomies.
It calms everything down really, really well to have a warm, heated blanket, and especially one that has a nice beating heart and slow breathing.
Well, we can't sell the dog.
Co-pace me, calm me down some. So
can we sell the book? Chapter 24. What is
chapter 24? The attention economy. I actually get into
all the stuff that's going to happen next year.
Yeah.
Chapter 24. Okay, we're going to put that link right here.
Okay.
See if I remember it next week.
There are books out there that are self-publication books that are not well written, but there is a book here that's actually well written. It reads well. It's not somebody who thinks they can write. It's somebody who can actually write and think. So there's a big difference. So
updated.
I'd urge you to get a copy and flip through it. It's got a lot of good thinking in it.
Are you talking about my book, Jay?
Yes.
Oh no, I would never. I would never.
Actually, it's a cute story.
I would never promote. I don't promote things here.
Yeah. It actually isn't self-published, Jay. I self-published. Like many people, because trying to navigate the market, but then I got picked up by a publisher within 4 months of it being out. So it's not self-published. Yeah.
But as I say, there are a lot of self-published books too. So don't just because it's a book doesn't get it mentioned necessarily. It's got to actually be well done.
Yeah.
So
and we're not biased.
There's an idea. So. There's an idea.
Dr. Marie J. Gunkelman, another Nerd Noodle Network podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. See you next week.
Enjoy your day.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Neuronoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.